sometimes when the kids, maybe a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, when I see that little, when their eyes start to
That's
get
it.
bright,
That's it.
and because now we know that we're talking about the same thing, that this silence thing, however, no matter how short I'm able to hold on to it, it has more freedom in it. It's got more possibility in it. So if I see that little glimmer, I bring out my little, whatever the little Russian dolls are. I got a few of them, and I say, open those out and stand them up next to each other. So here's the big one, the next one, and down to the
That's
little bitty
great.
one,
It's
right?
great.
And then I have them look at them, and I say, okay, which doll is the most important, and which is the most powerful? And I like to just watch them as they're kind of grappling with that. And I say, okay, now imagine them nested inside each other again, just in your mind. And now let me ask the question again, which one of these dolls is the most important? Which is the most powerful? And I can see them working on it. I don't know if I'm even asking anything, but they're driving around this model of the self. And I don't know what they're going to come up with. I don't know what I think about it either. But sometimes they'll say, the little one's the most powerful, and I'll say, why? They don't know, but they just kind of have that feeling. And I say, maybe it's the quickest. So it's kind of fun. And I'll say one thing about science. I agree so much that there's the scientific current and the spiritual current. They're very different currents. The scientific current is about empirical, testing out of hypotheses and so forth. And my wonderful mentor, and I know a great friend of yours too, Michel de Saltzman, in his wonderful essay on the subject, on psychiatry and the sacred, he described it so beautifully. He said the science world is like this infinitely long, enormous store with shelves that go 30 feet up on both sides, and it's always expanding. So no matter how much scientific knowledge you pile in your shopping cart, the store is growing faster than you could ever keep up with it. And inevitably you get to that place where anything new that you learn, well, something's falling out the bottom because you can only hold on to so much scientific knowledge. So that's sort of the end game there. He said, on the other hand, and sort of I remember him telling me about this in person, he said, you can think of the world of spiritual knowledge as a very small little store in the country. And it's one little room. Most of the shelves are empty. But if there is a shelf and it says, if you'd like some of this knowledge, leave your left arm here. And if you'd like some of this, leave your right foot here. In other words, it must be paid for in advance. And the other thing he said that really struck me is that that kind of knowledge cannot be gleaned from the pages of a book. It has to be embodied. Someone has to have lived it. And it is their living of it that's your real gift.
So,
That's the way that you can, if you're lucky, and I think for both of us, it's just such an astounding miracle, the teachers we've had.
It's a question that you remind me of, and probably you have it, I'm sure you must too, that when I'm speaking about this in my philosophy classes, I'm trying to practice it myself.
Yeah.
And not just be always, I have to also be a good academic professor as well. But alongside that, I'm trying to inhabit my body. I'm trying to open to another kind of mindfulness, which is really the goal of everything I'm talking about, all the great ideas and thoughts and questions, so that it's possible, if I really am trying that in a way without sacrificing my academic obligations, the students can feel something. They can't name what it is, something coming through the person. And I imagine, is that something that you apply too, that when you're speaking about this, are you also trying it yourself? So that, as you quoting Michel de Salzman, so that what you're saying is also something that's communicated through the presence of a person.
Well, of course, I sure wish I was trying.
But it's a valid question, don't you?
No, it's a great question. It's the question. And it's the question that I'm failing at constantly. But the failures aren't, in a way, really failures, because knowing that I'm failing is helping me
Of course.
come back. And in that regard, I'll say an interesting thing in terms of trying to feel myself. Sometimes it's in talking, but also sometimes, what about, because the vast majority of psychotherapy is listening. So then a very interesting thing happens, because if I'm trying to feel my body, I'm really not thinking up an answer to my patient. And so I really try to just let their words sort of come all over me like rain, but it's like an interior rain maybe. And in this regard, oddly enough, a science book has helped me hugely. This guy, Ron Goleman, I think he wrote Emotional Intelligence. I didn't read that one, but
Daniel Goleman.
Daniel Goleman, okay. Well, his new book, Social Intelligence, is astounding. It's 300 or 400 pages of evidence that there's no such thing as an individual human brain. Our brains are in sync with those around us. So what we are is not individual. What we are is group. And just what you were saying, that if you go down to the smallest doll, maybe that's something that we are all in common. And Goleman is saying this similar thing from the world of test tubes and EEGs, that more and more evidence by the day, anybody that you're with, your brain is syncing up with theirs. So individual brain, that's an old idea, and we're really coming to the limits of it. So I think that science book, in an odd way, it was like a wonderful correction to all my scientific study, where somehow science was starting to finally bring me back into all the mindfulness world. That even at the level you can measure with test tubes, there's nothing individual in a brain. Our brains are in sync.
This whole point of inner work, at the time you're talking about inner work, is speaking about inner work without speaking from it, one more betrayal of everything we know. And is that part of the problem, that great ideas, and which have meant to open up mindfulness and consciousness, began to be transmitted, yes, through books, which cannot do the same thing, although a great book can touch that. We mustn't underestimate that. There is a kind of writing and a kind of book that can open us, but only up to a point. But the science, communicating these things that are meant somewhere to lead to a transformation of the consciousness, are being spoken of or communicated without the communicator being present and trying and working at that. Even failing is fine. If you fail at that, but you're trying, that will communicate just as much as a success, because that is already a consciousness of a kind. So when you fail at what you're speaking about, and you're somewhere you are suffering that itself, the person on the other end feels something in your suffering. I don't know if Goleman treats that, but there's something, a quality of attention passes between people that is the real healing force, I think. Whether you succeed at it or not, the question is, are you trying? And most people are not trying because, let's face it, we don't know how to try. It's not so simple as say, just, become aware of yourself. You need help.
Right. I think I remember something you told me 30 years ago, my God. I believe I'm quoting you rightly, where you said that you thought that perhaps attention was the fundamental therapeutic force in the universe. I remember the eeriest thing whenever you talked to Michel de Saltzman. It was so eerie because, of course, I was much younger then, and so my attention is here, gone, here, wherever, right? So I'd always be coming back from wherever, and which might just be a second or 5 seconds or a tenth of a second. I don't know how you'd measure that at all. But it was so odd because Michelle was always there waiting for you. And so here I went. Now in the last 20 years, I spent a lot of time studying in Peru with these astounding shamans that live 72 hours by horseback from any civilization. They've never seen a car or a road. They're 95 and 98 years old, and they live at 15,000 feet. And They speak Quechua. Of course, I don't speak a word. I have to go through 2 translators. And yet, the first time I was in front of those guys, I had that same astounding feeling that I had when I was in front of Michelle or Madame. It was
Madame
like,
de Salzman,
right.
yeah.
It was like I was standing in front of somebody who on the inside was about the same size as the Pacific Ocean.
That's very, very, very interesting. Gosh. So the whole idea of a shaman, a real shaman, a real healer, is someone who has a great deal of presence and mindfulness. Not that he knows a lot of tricks, knows a lot of formulas, et cetera, but it's a being that is the healing, the essential component of the healing, as well as the knowledge that he gets from the dream or whatever. That's very, very interesting. So there are people of being out there.
Rare. But, one thing I think I totally agree with Gurdjieff about this, which is if you ever are around anybody that has any being, well, first of all, they're consummate actors. They can appear any way they want to, or disappear as far as that goes. But I love that line where Gurdjieff says, people who have transformed, the only response they get from people, what they evoke, the emotion they evoke from people around them, is always gratitude. I think he called it the being impulse of gratitude.
Absolutely.
And when you're around these shamans and you see how their tribes, that, these people live at 15,000 feet, and the veneration that those people have for these shamans. And I've only seen that with real spiritual elders. It's when a person has that power, it's like there's a hub, and the whole community rotates around that hub just effortlessly. There's a center to the whole community.
It's